How you doing, ScareLA? First of all, I wanted to say my partner for 12 years, Chris Williams, was supposed to be here with me today to co-host today's panel. Life sometimes intervenes, and Chris had a family thing, and he had to quickly go up to Northern California. I know he would love to be here with you guys, but he left it in my hands. So today, what I'm going to do for you guys is we're going to talk a little bit about Halloween Horror Nights 2017. I'm going to answer a whole lot of your questions from Twitter, and we're also going to talk a little bit about getting into the haunt industry, because a lot of you guys on Twitter asked me questions about that, so I'm going to try to address that today as well. We'll give you a little behind the scenes of some of the mazes we've already announced. And, you know, if you're good, maybe we'll announce some new stuff. By the way, monitors on our, no monitors up front. Let's start with last year. How many of you guys came to Halloween Horror Nights last year? Thank you, thank you, thank you. This is my 12th year of doing Halloween Horror Nights after bringing it back to Universal Studios Hollywood in 2006. And if there's one thing that I'm grateful for after all these years of doing Horror Nights, it's all of you. Because without you, there would be no Halloween Horror Nights. So thank you very much. And as a special thank you today, at the end of the panel, I'm going to ask a special trivia question, and we're going to give away to one lucky fan of the audience front of line passes to Halloween Horror Nights 2017, and an exclusive behind the scenes tour with yours truly. You guys want to hear an announcement? Yeah! Next slide, please. Question from Twitter. Forgive me, I've got no monitors, so I'm going to have to do this today. Will there be a maze announcement for your panel? From Slasher57. Well, Slasher57, next slide. Can I have the next slide? All right. Titans of Terror. Okay, so forgive me, but I just can't get enough of the classics. You know, last year we did Freddy vs. Jason, and overwhelmingly that was one of the most popular mazes we've ever done in Halloween Horror Nights. So it got me thinking, what could top that? Freddy, Jason, how about Leatherface? So we're doing a brand new maze. It's called Titans of Terror. This is going to be built over by Waterworld, where our Texas Chainsaw Massacre maze was last year. If you follow me on Twitter, I alluded to this maze by a code name Uberfan. And the reason that I codenamed this maze Uberfan, is, you know, when you're trying to put together the worlds of Freddy and Jason, obviously FPJ, there's already a movie where they coexist, but then you throw Leatherface into the mix, you know, you have to come up with like, well, what's the facade going to be? You know, it can't be the boiler room because that's specific to Freddy. It can't be Camp Crystal Lake because that's just Jason. You know, it can't be, you know, the Hewitt house or the Sawyer house because that's Leatherface. So we came up with a kind of an original spin for how we're going to treat the facade. And, you know, being a home haunter myself, and you'll see some examples of that later when we talk about getting into the haunt industry, I thought it would be really cool if we created a facade that's like, you know, a typical suburban home, Halloween night. It just happens that the ultimate Uber fan of Freddy, Jason, and Leatherface is trying to put on his own home haunt. And, you know, unfortunately, thunder and rain, it gets rained out. So he has to go inside and watch a movie marathon of his favorite slasher movies. And that's going to be the leaping off point. So actually the facade of this maze is going to be a home haunt, which we've never done before. So I thought that would be really cool. How about more? Next slide.
I'm enlisting some of my pals to join in on our little rampage on you kids. Gangs. Freddy, Jason, and Leatherface. And of course, yours truly. It's us against your pathetic souls on the Titans of Terror train. After all, it's time to play. We'll be waiting. Damn awards show. I had the deadbeats on stage to thank and bore you with the details.
Dissed by Chucky again. Titans of Terror, hosted by Chucky, is going to be the theme of Terror Tram this year. All new Terror Tram experience. What's really cool, one of the really cool things about this is that, you know, we always have the video that we play that takes you down to the back lot for Terror Tram. So that Chucky's going to host that. He's also going to be part of the experience itself. But working with Don Mancini, who is the creator of Chucky, we got to, for the first time ever in all the years of doing Horror Nights, we actually got to film with the real Chucky. And I met Brad Dourif, you know, who does the voice of Chucky. I worked with Brad. I've now reached a point in my life where I've written for Elmo and Chucky. So I wrote a script, and Don, you know, helped out with that. And Brad did the voice, and we just shot it a couple of weeks ago. So there's a custom video that you're going to see where Chucky will lead you into the experience, and that's Titans of Terror Tram. Yeah. All right, next slide. Yeah. He's got a new movie, by the way. You guys want to see a sneak peek? Yeah! Now, call me crazy, but if I was a therapist, I don't think I'd bring a good guy doll to like a group therapy when the person's been traumatized by Chucky. So that movie's going to be coming out. It's called Cult of Chucky. It's kind of a return to the more scarier tone of the earlier movies, and Chucky's got a whole new look. So all of that is what you're going to get to experience on Titans of Terror on the Terror Tram. I solicited a lot of questions on Twitter. I'm going to try to answer as many of them today as I possibly can. If you can give me the next slide. So, what are the names of the scare zones again? This is from Darcy. Tickets just went on sale, you guys might be aware, so you can buy your tickets for Halloween Horror Nights now. And we released this information, but I'll cover it for you in case you haven't checked out the website yet. Next slide, please. These are the 2017 Scare Zone names. Next slide. We have Halloween, that's on the top deck. Toxic Tunnel, that's the walk to the back lot. And Urban Inferno, I'm going to show you some imagery from all of those. We click to the next slide. So here's kind of the lineup on the top. You know, it occurred to me after all the years of doing Horror Nights, we've never really done a traditional Halloween scare zone after all these years. So this year, working, with Chris and also with Pat Quinn, who works, on our creative team and helps a lot with the park decor and the scare zones, we came up with this theme. It's kind of our take on classic Halloween. Those are the chainsaw guys. You can see the one guy down there. If you see a scarecrow guy with a chainsaw, there's a whole other troop. These aren't all of the characters, but this is kind of like the main looks that you'll see on the top deck of the theme park. So that's when you come in the main gate, go all the way up to like the New York section. If we can have the next slide. Toxic tunnel. Somebody on Twitter asked me, so how did you get the idea of doing a scare zone in a tunnel? I was like, well, there's this tunnel that we have to walk through on the way to the back lot. That's all back of the house. That's all back of the house movie studio. That's the technical building for the motion picture studio. And it's a tunnel. So we, of course, can't change the tunnel. We have to come up with themes that make sense for the tunnel. So the theme of this is if there was a gas leak and a bunch of city workers got called to investigate and the gas turned them into creatures like these guys. So, their gas masks are completely melted to their face. There's a whole bunch of these guys. This is just two of the looks. And then the last one, if you click the slide. Urban Inferno. All right, so this is the Metro set area of our back lot. This is the scare zone down there. This is kind of hell on earth. We love stilt walkers. I can't get enough of stilt walkers. Our stilt walkers are so amazingly talented. Every year I just stand in the park and with my, tongue hanging out, just like, I can't believe what they're doing. They're just so amazing. We've never done stilt walkers down here before, so we wanted to bring stilt walkers. That's the king and queen of hell. Also, we wanted to take kind of a learning from the gauntlet that we did with the Purge last year. So this scare zone is kind of a totally different layout than the ones we've done down there in the past. It's much more circuitous and twists and turns. And it's got kind of this theme as if, it's like Dante's Inferno in New York City. Or it's like New York City in the 70s, if you guys are. So those are the scare zones. Next slide. All right, we have more Twitter fan Q&A. Question, so how did you get into the haunt business? This is from Austin Dalton. And one more on that topic. How did you make that a career? A judge once asked me that. I remember I had to do jury duty once, and I've never actually ever gotten onto a jury. I don't know why. They always kick me off. But I actually got into the courtroom once where the lawyers, they interview you, and the judge always asks you usually, like, what's your profession? And I tried to explain what I do, and the judge went, that's not a job. And he, get out of here. And he just kicked me out. And I was like, oh, okay. But it's a good question, and it's apropos to being at a convention like Scare Los Angeles. How many of you guys are like home haunters? Anybody? Quite a few of you, okay. How many of you aspire to get into this weird, wacky industry that we're in? Okay. What I thought I'd do a little bit today, and then we're going to share more information about some of the mazes we're doing, like American Horror Story. But what I thought I'd do, because this convention is a lot about the haunt industry, is just kind of explain to you a little bit about how I got to do what I do. Everybody has a different path, so it's not like this will literally work for you. Everybody's different. But I thought I'd just share for a few minutes a little bit about how I got to do what I do, in the hopes that maybe it'll help you guys as you're aspiring to maybe get into this industry. It's a weird little industry, you can't go to college for it, There is no major in haunting, at least that I'm aware of. So a lot of it, you learn on your feet. If you click the next slide. That's me. That's me at 4 years old. I titled this Born to Scare because that's true. When I was 4 years old, my mom made the mistake of showing me the 1931 Universal classic Frankenstein. And it was during the 70s, and at that time, a lot of those old classic Universal movies were being reshown on television a lot. And my mom just kind of parked me on the couch and let me watch Frankenstein. And when she came back, I was crying. And she thought, oh my God, I've traumatized my son. Now I'm gonna have to pay for therapy for years and years and years. And after she started talking to me, she realized that that wasn't the case. I wasn't afraid of Frankenstein. I just felt so damn bad for him. Because if you watch that movie, and I think this is true of all great horror movies, they're sympathetic characters. You can relate to Frankenstein because, who is Frankenstein? He's a guy who was stitched together from the parts of, criminals that were, hung and then dug out of the grave and then jolted to life with electricity. And all through the movie, he's really just trying to do one thing, right? What's he trying to do? He's trying to find out where he belongs in the world. And everywhere he's going, when he learns how to talk and bride, he's like, friend, friend. And everybody he meets is awful to him, Whether it's Fritz in the first movie, or later on Igor, or the villagers, they're kind of the real monsters in that movie. So for whatever reason, when I was a really, really young kid, I identified with those movies, and they're all kind of like little mini Shakespearean tragedies. And I became very, very quickly obsessed with Universal Monsters. Did you guys have Aurora monster models when you were kids? Or do you know what those are? That's what you see down there next to my birthday cake. That's the Wolfman and King Kong. I wish I still had those, because they're worth a lot of money. My brothers blew them up with M80s on 4th of July one year. And years later, I went up to my brother and I'm like, you know that creature in the Black Lagoon? That's worth like $1,500. You blew it up. Next slide. So every Halloween, I had to be one of the Universal Monsters. I'm wearing a Ben Cooper shirt. Those are Ben Cooper masks from the 1970s. You can pretty much pick me out because I'm the monster in every picture. I'm Frankenstein in the first one. I'm Super Wolfman? I'm not really sure what I was trying to pull off there. I'm Wolfman in like a red cape. But even weirder, my brother Dan is a hippie, because that was actually okay, I don't know if you guys remember the 70s, because kids, you'd go like, I'm gonna be a hippie. And your parents would go, okay, here's a pillowcase, go out, we'll see you later. And then I was the mummy in really bad sneakers in that last one. And ironically, my brother Dave was Alice Cooper that year. And after all these years, I've actually showed these pictures to Alice. So I was obsessed with Halloween, I was obsessed with the Universal Monsters, and of course that led to, next slide, going to Universal Studios. That was the place you could go where you could actually meet the classic monsters. Also, I have one in there from the old Movieland Wax Museum. Do you guys remember that in Buena Park? They had that Chamber of Horrors. That's the Wolfman from Movieland. That's my family riding on the little Model T at Prop Plaza back in the early 70s at Universal Studios. And in the lower picture, that's me looking like in love with the Wolfman. Although the Wolfman looks like Michael Landon from I Was a Teenager. Or he doesn't look anything like the Wolfman. I'm not sure what they were doing back then. But I would always ask my parents, can we go to Universal? Can we go to Universal? And I would go there all the time. And then shortly after that, after being inspired seeing old shows at Universal like Man of a Thousand Faces, the makeup show we used to have, or Castle Dracula, or even the old special effects show, I got inspired to do my own thing creatively. Next slide. I became a home haunter at the age of 10. This is my infamous Star Wars haunted house. 1977, I was 10 years old. I'm the sand person. We made all these costumes because in 77 you couldn't buy anything from Star Wars. Nobody anticipated that Star Wars would be this big hit. So the first year it came out, there was no consumer products. Do you guys who are old enough, do you remember that? Yeah. You had to like actually write in to get the action figures, and they sent you an IOU because they hadn't made them yet. Same thing was true of costumes. They didn't have costumes, so we made everything out of like paper mache and chicken wire. And then the bottom ones are later home haunts. I did it for 4 years. That's my mom and my grandma down there. And how many of you are parents that brought your kids to this and this isn't really your thing, but you brought your kids anyway? Yeah. You're doing a really good thing. Seriously. If there's one thing, yeah, absolutely. My mom's a Catholic theologian, author of multiple books. My dad is a businessman, not a creative bone in his body. But they supported their kid, and they let their kid do this crazy home haunt in their house. It started off really, really small, but by the end of it, I was like, Dad, you can't park in the garage. It's like, August. I gotta build the pendulum scene in there. And I remember that year, that bottom image with the guy holding the axe, because that's a real axe. And I was playing Norman Bates in the bathroom, jumping out of the bathroom, and I had a real butcher knife. And I remember my dad's face, he was just like, and he looked out the window and there's like 200 or 300 kids lined up, because word had gotten out that we were like the place to go during Halloween. And he just looked at me and he goes, we're gonna be sued. You can't do this anymore. You've got to stop, And at that point he was like, we can't do this anymore. This has gotten out of control. There was a little local haunt, and this is something I would really recommend to anybody that wants to get in this industry. Volunteer for a local haunt if you can, even if you're not getting paid. I was 14 years old and I designed a haunt And I didn't get paid or anything, it was for charity, but my first like kind of semi-professional haunt I did, I was 14. So I've been pretty much doing this all my life. But then things change. This is going to be embarrassing, but go ahead, next slide. I discovered theater and rock and roll. That's me playing Uncle Sam in junior high. That's the first play I ever did. I mentioned theater, and that's me in the 80s, if you couldn't tell, singing, in high school. And then that's the first time I ever got on stage and sang in a band in really bad fashion choice. Army fatigue and black spandex pants with the shirt tucked in. I actually showed that to Alice. He was like, nice pants. I show this because theater is a great background for what we do. When you think about it, in theater you have sets, you have lighting, you have actors, you have directing, you have props, you have makeup, all the things we use for creating Horror Nights. Pretty much everybody that works on my team today has a theater background of some, way, shape, or form. Mine actually was in performance. I was lucky enough to get a full ride drama scholarship for acting. So my degree, actually, believe it or not, is in acting. I didn't end up as an actor, but it was a great foundation for learning, how to do what we do. So again, if you volunteer at your local community theater, it's a great way to learn. And that's really key to trying to get into anything. It's just learning and the steps you take along the way. And life does this. There's all these, there's all these moments where you can either go left or you can go right. And you don't realize it at the time, but in retrospect, you realize, oh, that made all the difference. That decision I made at that moment in my life. I'll give you an example of that in a second. Next slide. So, when I graduated from college with an acting degree, I became a tour guide at Universal Studios, 1989. That's me giving the tour in 1989. We have a great program at Universal with our tour guides. We do all kinds of acting showcases with them. We bring ages down. A lot of people who are tour guides have gone on to be actors, writers, directors, producers, casting agents. It's kind of like the modern day equivalent of working in the mailroom, like back in the old 1960s studio system days. These days, our tour guides are kind of like the ambassadors to Hollywood. And so I started as a tour guide. We had a great program where times have changed a little bit, but back in those days, you could call up on your days off and say, hey, I want to visit a set. We were filming Back to the Future 2 when I started, so I spent that summer hanging out on the set of Back to the Future 2, watching Robert Zemeckis direct that movie. I kind of learned directing, so whenever I film or direct anything for Horror Nights, I kind of learned that by just watching people on my days off working at Universal. I also, strangely enough, I grew up in the town of Hacienda Heights in Whittier, and Back to the Future filmed at the Twenty Hills Mall. If you ever go to the Twenty Hills Mall in the City of Industry, I worked in a toy store there when I was in high school when they were filming the original Back to the Future. So I actually watched them make that first scene where the DeLorean comes out of the truck. I watched all that when I was a little kid, so for some reason I've had this really weird long connection to Back to the Future. But it all, I got a lot of that experience just watching on my days off at Universal. Then I kind of got my break to get into the creative side of the business. Next slide. I interviewed to be a production assistant. Do you know what a production assistant is? Or sometimes called a gopher? Yeah. You're pretty much the bottom rung of the production ladder. You're basically the guy or girl who, go make a copy of this, go get me coffee, go do this, go do that. That's why they call him a gopher. Go for that, go for this. But I worked on, when we were building the lower section of the theme park, we were doing a show called The World of Cinemagic at the time, and it had Back to the Future, Alfred Hitchcock, and Harry and the Hendersons as its theme. So I was a production assistant on that. My dad gave me advice years and years and years ago, and it's great advice that I would give to anybody today. Whatever you're doing in life, or whatever moment in life you're in, do it to the best of your ability. Doesn't matter if you're working at McDonald's or you're working on a production. The reason is quality rises to the surface, and if you work really hard, and people will notice you, and that leads to good things. Ironically, I got laid off. Thank you, Universal. I got laid off right after this project. Because back in those days, it wasn't common for Universal to do new attractions every single year. It might be like 5 years before they do a new ride or a new show. It's a lot different today. And they had a very, very small group at the time. It was called Planning and Development. It's now called Universal Creative. So I literally got a pink slip when I finished the project, and I worked really hard, and I did everything that my dad advised me to do. But one of the guys who I worked for said, hey, we can't hire you, but there's a new company that's been around for a little bit of time, but they're getting in the theme park industry and they're looking for a coordinator. Why don't you interview with them? And I did. So I left Universal for 5 years, But working at this smaller company, they started to, I'd gotten into writing by this time, and they realized, oh, this kid can write. So they started letting me write, and that's kind of how, in those 5 years I worked for this other company outside Universal, I got a lot of my experience. If you click to the next slide, all kinds of stuff happened during that period. It's kind of an eclectic mix up there. I worked on Jurassic Park, the movie, for 3 days. We were brought in to consult on the scene. Do you know Jurassic Park, you guys? Remember the scene where Hammond's given the big business case, and there's the Mr. DNA, little video, and it's like this big slideshow presentation. The company I worked for at that time did big multimedia shows, and this is the days of slide projector shows. So we got brought in by the producers to consult on how that scene should be filmed, and like the theme park aspects of the movie. So I worked on the film for 3 days. I don't have credit or anything, but I worked on Jurassic Park. I worked, he was dead by then, but I worked for Elvis Presley. I designed this big, huge show in Las Vegas that never got built, but I went to Memphis and hung out with Elvis's family and wrote this whole big show for Las Vegas that never saw the light of day, and did a whole bunch of other projects in Las Vegas, the Luxor and the MGM when that theme park was there. My band at that time was kind of going strong, and that's the picture at the bottom. And I wrote my first and only movie, which is horrible, and I don't advise you ever to watch it. It was called Rock and Roll Fantasy. The name has changed multiple times. There's 2 claim to fame about this movie. I destroyed the career of one of the girls from Annie. It was the last movie she ever did. She was one of the orphans in Annie. And she gives you an idea of how good this movie was. I was like 22 or something when I wrote it. But the funny thing about it is the guy who directed the movie and the guy who produced the movie, it was their first movie. Those are the guys who make Sharknado now. So even though I didn't, decide to be a screenwriter, I got a lot of experience writing and being at that company. So after 5 years, I came back to Universal. I came back as a freelance writer, and I did that for like a year, and then eventually they were like, you're here all the time, we should just hire you. So I started out as a show writer, and then I became a show writer, producer. If you click the next slide, worked on a ton of projects working with Universal Creative, literally everything from Sesame Street for Japan, for the 3D movie in Japan, to the Mummy ride here in Hollywood, to the reinvention of the studio tour, to special effects stages, and a bunch of other projects. But when I was starting out, I would maybe write 40 different concepts for every one that ever got produced. And it was really, it was a time in my career where I was like, gosh, is anything I write ever going to get produced? And I would just work on a concept or a treatment, and I'd write it, and I'd write it. And it took probably a couple of years till I actually started to get stuff actually produced. One of the earliest ones was the reinvention of the studio tour in 2000. The first thing I actually got into that park were those movie posters that are still there as you go down the hill. I did that in 1999. And then I got to oversee putting video on the tram and working with directors like Ron Howard and Steven Spielberg and all these people. And of course, the last thing I did with Universal Creative was the Mummy ride. And then right after that, I got a phone call. And at this point, I'd relocated to Orlando because they decided to move the creative group out to Orlando. And it was the general manager of the park in Hollywood, and he goes, hey, we're thinking of bringing Horror Nights back. And at this point, you guys remember, we hadn't done it in 5 years or something? We were out of the business completely. And so I went to everybody I could find there in Orlando who'd been doing Horror Nights and said, what do you think? What do you think? And they're like, don't do it. you design rides, why would you want to do that? And I was like, I started as a homeowner, this is what I love to do. So every single person said, don't do it, because LA is the most competitive market in the world for this kind of thing. So I just had that feeling, this is one of those moments, you go left or you go right. Same thing for when I got my original Pink Slip. I could have gone back to the tour, I could have hung out with my friends, and I had all my social set were tour guides at that time. But I decided to try to go to the next thing. And that's what I mean about the paths in life. Looking back on it now, that decision to not go back to the tour was huge. It got me into the door in the themed entertainment industry. The decision to come back to Hollywood and do Horror Nights was huge. It's my 12th year of doing Horror Nights, and I get to do what I, dreamed of doing when I was 10. That's right. And, kind of the rest is history. But my thing with Horror Nights and what I really, and Chris, I should, of course have to mention Chris. Chris is like the Michelangelo of Horror Nights, and I'm like the P.T. Barnum. Chris is the true artist. He's our art director, production designer. He designs all these amazing mazes. But we've had this really long partnership together, and early on, Chris and I decided this is the way we're going to work together. If we both don't agree, it doesn't go in the maze. And we've kept that to this day. We have to both mutually agree. We argue a lot, but unless we're both on the same page, it doesn't go in. My thing is, having been around Hollywood a long time, that's what I wanted to bring to the event. I wanted to create what I call today living horror movies, right? I wanted to license, Nightmare on Elm Street, and Texas Chainsaw Massacre, and Friday the 13th. And I wanted to put you guys in the movie so that you felt like you walked through the silver screen and you're living your favorite horror movie. So that's the brand that we established for ourselves, and 12 years later, that's what we're still doing. So that's just a little quick bit about how I got to where I am. What I would say to all you guys who want to do this for a living is, if you have a dream and it's something you want to do, you got to go for it. And for all your parents that are cool and support you and bring you to these things, that's what I mean about you're doing the right thing. My parents, I'm sure in retrospect, they were terrified. Their kids are 2 musicians and a carny, and my sister who's a social worker. But all of us are working in the entertainment industry. Both my brothers are professional musicians. I'm doing what I'm doing, and they had faith in their kids, and they trusted that their kids' passions. It's not enough to have passion. You have to have luck. You have to have breaks. You got to work hard. But if you do believe that this is what you want to do, you got to at least try to go for it. So that's my message to you today. On that subject, I get asked this all the time. When are internships for HHN usually posted, and do you have to be a student to apply? I'm just going to put it up on the screen. Next slide. Yeah, there is a program. It's called NBC Universal Campus to Careers. It's an internship program for all of Universal. So that's the movies, television, it's everything. But if you look it up online, Campus to Careers, it is through schools. It's a school credit program. But that's how we hire interns. So if you've ever wanted to know how you get in as an intern, that's how you get in. If you ever wanted to look for a job, that's where you look for it. universalstudioshollywood.com/jobs. And if you want to be a performer, ushauditions.com. Any role we're casting for the park, that always gets posted there. So those are 3 resources that you can use. All right, next slide. All right, more Twitter fan Q&A. Let's go to the next one. Where can I find a format for writing a house treatment? I get asked this all the time. I don't know. I kind of invented it. I just made it up. I'll put it up on the screen. Go ahead. It's a typical page of one of my treatments. This is from an Insidious maze from a few years ago. But basically what I do, and anybody can do this, is at the top, these are all the disciplines that are affected by this particular scene in the maze. What the talent is, if there's hand props for the talent, what the scenic is, what the props and decor is, what the audio's doing, if there's video, lighting, special effects, and any particular notes. And then it's a description, and it's a narrative written from the guest POV as if you're walking through the maze. And I just kind of made that up years ago when I was trying to decide, well, how do I tell my team what's in my head? How do I communicate that so everybody knows what they have to create, build, buy, etc. And once we do that, it gets broken down into what's called an element list. And it's just the boringest meeting you'll ever attend when we put these together. Because they're like 3 hours long for every maze. And we go scene by scene, and we pull up Chris's drawings, and we go, okay, there's a house. And it has 6 windows. And it has 12 shutters. And there's grass. And every single element has to be captured, and then we assign who's going to do it, if it's our team or a vendor, etc. But that's how you track everything, so you know how to create these things. All right, next question. What is the process of sound design? My subconscious is still echoing with that fantastic version of Mr. Sandman. And that's from Roxy. Click the slide. So what she's referring to, in case you didn't come last year, is our Halloween Help Comes to Haddonfield Maze, Halloween 2. We had this crazy scene that was inspired by the poster for the movie where you walked through that giant skull and you entered this room where there were just all these floating skulls that were also based on the poster art for Halloween 2, using black light so you couldn't see the performer's body, you couldn't tell who was real and who was static. But we used this really messed up version of Mr. Sandman, which we created for that. So typically, if you're into sound, this is how it works when you're doing a maze. Every time we make a deal for a movie, one of the first things I ask is, who in post-production, audio post-production, on the film team can I talk to? Because what I need is what's called the Pro Tools, the final Pro Tools session, the software they use to create a movie. And I needed split audio tracks, dialogue, effects, music. And once I get that, I can isolate any piece of dialogue, any piece of music, any sound effect, and then I work with a vendor. The company I work with is called Diablo. They're in Pasadena. They've been working with me since the beginning of Horror Nights. They have all of these really experienced sound engineers. Our main sound engineer, he does movies all year round. He's done the Avengers movies. He's done Braveheart. His teams have been nominated for Academy Awards, but he loves doing Horror Nights. So he comes back every year and works with me. When I write my treatments now, I write time code in them. So if I hear a sound effect when I'm watching, I'm the worst person to watch a horror movie with, by the way. Because I will literally sit there and go, pause. My wife won't watch movies with me anymore. There was a really good scream, and it was 1 hour, 14 seconds, and 26 frames, now I put all that information in, so when they're going through the movies, they can find exactly what I want and put it back together. Because we're essentially creating a whole new sound design for our maze. It's like, the equivalent to doing multiple movies at once. But that's how we do sound for Halloween Horror Nights. Okay, next slide. Where do the old props go? Like Crimson Peak, etc. from Red Sonja. I can show you. There's good old Crimson Peak from a couple of years ago working with Guillermo del Toro. We have this huge venue off-site. We had to recently get a bigger one because we outgrew it with all the stuff we have from Horror Nights. I'll give you an example. Click to the next slide. You want to cluck? It's like a prop department. It truly is. We have so much furniture. We have so many. That's just like our taxidermy head section, And like, you're gonna do Texas? That's where you go. Bodies, chairs, furniture. It's like a giant prop warehouse, and we accumulate all this stuff, and it's all computer. Everything's got a barcode on it. It's all in a database. So Chris and his designers can sit there and look through the book and go, oh, okay, we're like, this year is a great example. We're doing The Shining, right? That's early, 1980, but the furniture is all very 1970s. So he's got to find period furniture, period, even in the bathroom, period fixtures for the bathroom for room 237. And we try to find them first within our own inventory, and if we can't, then we'll go out and rent it from our own prop department at the movie studio, or purchase it, and it becomes part of our inventory. Next one. What has been your favorite facade in all your years at HHN? That's always tough to answer. This is from Steven Guzman. Next slide. I put several of them up here. For the 3D mazes, to me, Alice Cooper, Welcome to Night. Alice Cooper Goes to Hell. I really like that facade. I love The Thing. That's what you see with the snow up there that we did back in, I don't think it was like 2011 maybe. Of course, we built the Slaughtered Lamb for an American Werewolf in London. That was awesome. I loved what we did with Exorcist last year. It looked exactly like the movie poster. And Krampus was one of my favorite facades. I love that too. But I actually do have a favorite. Next slide. La Llorona. I'll just really quickly tell you how that came to be. Next slide, please. So, does that look like the facade of La Llorona? Yes. Should. It's a real mission. It's the Mission San Francisco de la Espada. Anybody know where that mission is? You'd think San Francisco. No, Texas. Don't ask me why. It's in Texas. Chris came across this in his research. Chris and I do a bunch of visual research when we're building mazes. When we were doing La Llorona, he came across this and he showed me this picture and he goes, do you see it? And I said, well, I see the mission. He's like, no, do you see what I see? And I'm like, what? And he goes, look. 2 eyes, a nose, and a mouth. And I was like, oh, that's cool. So when you were standing out in front of that, there was a big lighting change where we lit through those 2 windows, the lower window and the door, to make it look like this big fiery evil face. Then Chris took that and did a color study, so if you click to the next slide. It's Chris's, basically telling our scenic department this is what we want it to look like, and then the final product. And there you go. I always thought Chris has done some amazing work over the years. He's so talented, an art director and production designer. But I've always felt like that, to me, that's his best facade that we've ever done together. I just thought that was amazing. We did it twice. And even though we have, databases and barcodes and all this, the second time we did La Llorona, I remember when we were on site and we were building it, and I went up there and I'm like, where's the bells? We can't find the bells. You can't find the bells. The bells were all custom sculpted, you know, we didn't buy them, we made them, you know. So we had to make the bells all over again because we just couldn't find the bells. When you're dealing with millions of pieces of inventory, sometimes things get lost. Okay, next slide. What's the most brutal scene you've ever had to work on in a maze? And again, there's lots of options. This is from Ethan. Next slide. I put a few up there. The rack from Saw, that was one of the most horrifying traps. The performer could actually control, you know, his bones being broken. Last year we did that body chop kill with an effects table with a performer where pieces of his body were just everywhere. I thought that was pretty crazy. At the bottom, that's our first Texas Chainsaw Massacre maze. That's what we call the face peel. It's the guy's wearing a prosthetic of a skinned face, and then there's a second prosthetic that has a bunch of tiny little magnets in it, and you could literally rip the face right off the guy, and it looks like you're peeling his face off in real time. That's actually Toby Hooper, the director of Texas Chainsaw Massacre. He came and saw it, and everywhere he went, he was like, oh, I gotta get a picture of that. But I do have an answer for this one as well. Next slide. To me, this is it. We knew this was edgy, you know, when we were doing it. I didn't have kids when I did this. Now I think I'd have a much harder time with this. But, you know, if you know the story of La Llorona, that's the story. So that's what we had to do. It was pretty ingenious the way Chris built this particular scene. The water was only like a couple of inches deep. It was using like pool liner, and then you dye the water to look that murky color of brown. And then he took the bodies of the kids and he cut them, like bisected them, right down the middle. So if you actually pulled that kid out of the water, it would just be, you know, no face, no nothing. It was just cut in half, so that it looked like it was, you know, floating in the water, but the water was only like that. But to me, that was the most disturbing scene I think we did. Except we have a new makeup this year that I think might be more disturbing than that. So can I show it to you? All right, let's go. That's the concept art. I'm not going to tell you what this is for. You're going to have to figure it out later. No, it's not Walking Dead. Something else. Here's the makeup sculpt that our makeup artist, Pat McGee, just sent me this week. Next slide. That's nasty. And the idea with the eyes, we're hoping to get some free animation with that eyeball. So that's one of the hundreds of sculpts that Pat McGee and McGee Effects are working on right now for Horror Nights. And again, I'm not going to tell you where this is. You'll find out when you come to Horror Nights. All right, next slide. Another Twitter question. What can we expect from the Roanoke maze? How many of you guys are fans of American Horror Story? So, did you go to the maze last year? Yeah. So obviously last year we did 3 seasons, right? We did Murder House, Freak Show, and Hotel. And we were going to do that again. That was the plan. We're going to do the other 3 seasons. We'll do Roanoke, we'll do Asylum, we'll do Coven. To really get into the research, particularly with Roanoke, as I was going through Roanoke, Chris and I just kept going, God, this is like a whole maze unto itself. And I started thinking, like, maybe I want to save Asylum, you know, and maybe do like a whole maze on it one day. So what we decided to do this year was actually do, instead of a compilation of 3 seasons, just do 1. I mean, that show has so much content. There's so many different things you can pull from. So that's one of the things that's different about American Horror Story. I'll show you a little bit about what you can experience in the maze. If you click the next slide. This will give you an idea. That was the announcement video for American Horror Story. Go ahead and click the next one. That's the key art. Give me the next slide. Let's give a little sneak peek of like how we're coming at Roanoke. Next slide. That's one of the many, many, many elevations we have to do for the maze. Once you go inside, you're going to be going through the woods. And of course, you're going to see the sacrificial altar with the piggy man and the burned guy and all of the totems, and all of that has to be drawn up, and that's what that elevation's for. Next slide. When it comes to the characters, you know, you don't really get a good look at this on the show. That's why I put it up here. You know, there's kind of two versions, because you got the, you know, the TV show within the, and reality happening at the same time. So we opted to go for the second half of the show when the real Butcher shows up, because we noticed all of those characters were like scarier and creepier looking. So, of course, you're going to run into the Butcher. Click next slide. That's our concept sketch for the Butcher. Next one. That's one of the many bad things the Butcher does. We want to do a scene where she's disemboweling somebody live right in front of you and literally pulling his intestines out live in front of you every 10 seconds. So we had to come up with this cool little effect for how to do that. What's really cool is that, you know, there's the facade out front, but then there's the house, right? Next slide. I'm sorry, that's the Butcher. That's the sculpt for the Butcher. Next slide. The house. So there's a whole other facade inside the maze. So once you get into the tent, you know, we built that whole damn house. So I was looking, you know, it's in the construction phase right now, but I walked through there the other day and was like, ooh, there it is. And of course, we want to take you through that house. It's such a cool environment. If you give me the next slide. You know, the totems, next slide. The pigtails on the wall, classic wiggling. Next slide. Piggy Man. And I think I have the sculpt for this. Next slide. One of the things with Piggy Man, that pig head is huge. If you look at that picture, how is the performer going to see? Because the eyes are like here. So we had to kind of devise a way for the performer to see, and I think I have the sculpt on the next slide. Yep. So that's the makeup sculpt. We're going to create areas that have screens that we're painting so the performer can see, but you won't be able to pick up on them. Next one. That's his little hooves. Next slide. Of course, you know, the nurses in the dining room, where they spell out murder on the wall. And the nurses, again, in the second half of the season are really creepy. If you go to the next slide, you don't really get a good look at them on the show. It's really fast, but that's what they look like. Next slide. Take you down to the basement. Next slide. We're going to go to the tunnel. That means we're going to run into Edward Mott in the chins. Go ahead. That's our concept art for how to do, you know, the candle. When he was holding the candle, he would look ghoulish. So we're trying to create that look. Next slide. That's the sculpt we're working on for him. Next slide. Of course, the cannibals. You know. If we were doing a mashup of like 3 seasons, we'd never be able to fit all these scenes in. That's one of the reasons we did what we did. We're going to take you into that cannibal shot. And then at the very end, next slide, surprise ending. So last year, you know, we did a thing where we ripped on the opening title sequence, you know, where the monkey and freak show with the symbols. There were so many cool things from American Horror Story that don't end up in an episode, but are part of that world. We have a new one this year. I'm not going to say what it is. You're going to have to wait, but it's really, really cool. It's going to scare the hell out of you. All right, next one. Twitter fan Q&A. Will we ever see Hollywood Harry again? Did you guys like Hollywood Harry? Good. I don't know. He went up into the hills. God knows. He may come back, he may not. Next slide. That was him out there in Tram last year, but I thought I'd just really quickly tell you where he came from. You know, something me and Eli Roth cooked up, but go ahead, next slide. There's 2 inspirations for Hollywood Harry. On the 50th anniversary of the studio tour, I'm kind of the de facto historian for the theme park and the movie studio. And I was going through all these old pictures of the tour back in the 60s, and I came across this. I don't know who the hell that is. No idea. Some freaky clown riding the tram. And it got me like thinking, like, was he the mascot for the park in '64? What was he? You know, where did he come from? And I haven't been able to find that out. And there's one other thing that informed this story. Do you know who this guy is, Pete the Hermit? This is a forgotten piece of Hollywood history, and it's really weird, but it's a true story. And real quick, I'll tell you, because I know I'm getting close on time, but I'll tell you this story. So years ago, you know, Universal was founded by a guy named Carl Laemmle. And his daughter, up until a few years ago, his niece, her name was Carla, was still alive. She was in her 90s, and she lived in, I think, Toluca Lake or Burbank. She lived close by. So years ago, I arranged to interview her because I knew that she grew up on the lot. And when I say grew up on the lot, I mean she lived there. Back in those silent film days, people lived on the lot. That's why they call it Universal City, because it was an actual city. People lived there. she told me all these stories about, she was a fan of the opera, she could remember the silent film Phantom of the Opera and working with Lon Chaney. She was in the opening shot of Dracula, she can remember all that. But I really wanted to talk to her about what was the lot like in the silent film era. And she told me all these cool stories. When Halloween would come, they would actually set up like a haunted, kind of like a walk in the woods. The special effects guys would set up something and the kids would have to walk through it, and I was like, oh, that's cool. But she told me the story of Pete the Hermit. So there was this guy named Pete. He was from the East Coast. He was like a banker. He was a businessman. And he came to Hollywood like so many people trying to get into the movie industry. And I'm not sure, obviously it didn't work out the way he wanted it to. So he ended up living in the hills around Universal, actually up on Beechwood Canyon, and raised goats. And sometimes would come down to Hollywood Boulevard dressed as Moses, with his staff and everything, with his goats. And he would direct traffic. And, this is the beginning of what you see today in front of Groman's Chinese Theater. He would hand out postcards of himself, autographs. He was like the first kind of, Groman's Chinese Theater cosplay guy, except he was Moses. But she told me the story where she's like, oh yeah, and of course there was Pete the Hermit. He used to come down from the hills, and I'm like, what? And she told me this whole story about this strange guy who lived in the hills. So I combined the idea of this clown with this idea that maybe, after he was unceremoniously kicked to the curb, he just went up in the hills, and he's just living in the hills and, living off of, there used to be all this deer on the back lawn, and I noticed over the years, I said, where'd the deer go? Maybe he ate them. And that's how, Eli and I concocted the story for Hollywood Harry. And just a couple more images on that. That's an aerial shot of the back lot. You see all those dirt roads. Those are old fire roads that have existed since the silent film era. So if you go up there, they go all around the property. So that's, in our mind, we were like, what if he lives up there, So that was part of the story as well. And then we had to come up with what he looks like. So the next slide is our concept art. That's the concept art for his face done by our very own Lucas Colshaw, who does all of our concept art for Horror Nights. Next. And then I had this idea that he found an old tour guide jacket from 1964, and he eats tour guides. And so all of those name badges are all the different eras of name badges in the history of the theme park. So as he kills people, he just goes, oh, okay, I'll put their name on my coat. So we had to reproduce old 1960s, tour guide jackets. And then, next slide. And then we had to cast him. This is Robert. Robert, did you guys go through Insidious a couple years ago? Yeah. Do you remember the really freaky guy? He's got your baby. He's got your, that's Robert. Robert, when we cast him in that role and I was directing him, he was like kind of bummed. He was like, I want to scare people. I don't want to, I'm like, dude, if you do this, people are going to love it. And I can't tell you how many people would ask me, is that a robot? And he was just on it every night. He was just lip syncing the track, but he was super creepy. So that kind of stuck in my head. So when I cast Hollywood Harry, I cast Robert. And he played the happy version and the scary version. And then, we went out on the back lot. I didn't really tell anybody. I just put a camera crew with iPhones, because it was supposed to be found footage. I put all my cameramen on the tram, and we just said, okay, Robert, just walk out of the woods. And we just filmed stuff. And we did that for a whole day. And then I had to do the happy version of him up at City Walk. And I'd actually, I notified everybody, hey, I'm going to be filming. I'm going to be up at City Walk. He's going to just be walking around with balloons and stuff. Something got lost in translation. So I showed up with Robert and little film crew, and we were over by the old neon, logo fountain to get a retro shot of him. And I was filming, and I turned around, and it was like, there were 6 security guards running for me right now. And I was like, whoa, it's cool, guys. And they're like, what are you doing here? What's this clown? I'm like, it's all right, it's Halloween Horror Nights. But we did all this crazy thing. I had lunch with Eli not too long ago, and we were talking about the viral. My idea was, we'll shoot it, and then you guys release it as a viral video. I think he told me 9 million plays, something like that. It was crazy how much attention this got. Our timing was really good. It was like, last year was all about, crazy clowns. Yeah. And then we created this whole backstory, so he was the host of a kid's show, and then we photoshopped him into old historic pictures of the property. So it was a whole big production that we did, but it's a really fun character. Yeah, who knows? Maybe we'll bring him back one day, we'll see. Next slide. Okay, another fan question. Why no more VIP? Miss the amazing buffets. Let's run a video. So never underestimate the power you all have. I can't tell you how many people would come up to me, not just in Horror Nights, not just in like the park or City Walk, but walking down an average street, somebody would drive past on a car and go, "What happened to VIP?" I was like, "Sorry, you know." So we heard you, basically, is the message. We know you guys love the VIP, or as we call it, RIP experience. So it is back. You can go on the, you can go on our website right now and buy tickets. We brought it back, and we brought it back because you asked for it. So there you go. When will the calendar of valid dates for frequent fear passes in Hollywood be available? Well, the truth is it already is. When you go to your ticket options, you see that little question mark next to frequent fear. If you click it, you know, question mark, information, click it, it comes up. I'm going to show you what it is anyway, because I know you're not going to do that. 15 nights. Those are the dates when the pass is valid if you buy frequent fear. However, I'm going to tell you how to game the system. You can get a 16th night. This is how you do it. If you come the first 2 weeks, I'm looking for nods, right? First 2 weeks, okay, good. And validate your frequent fear pass, you can have 16 nights, okay? So if you want to come more than 15, if you come in the first 2 weeks and validate that pass, you can get an extra bonus night and take advantage of that. Okay, next slide. Will this be your last, everybody asks me this every single year, will this be your last year at Horror Nights? Crying face emoji from Black Iris. I set out to do 10 years, that was my goal, I'm on my 12th year. I live in 2 countries right now. I live in Ireland and I live in America. It's just the way things worked out in life. But as long as I feel, you know, our fans, I love doing this, and as long as our fans are passionate about what we do and we're passionate about what we do, you know, we hope to do it for years to come. So. All right. So we've gotten to the point in the presentation where I'm going to give away this, which says, congratulations, you are invited to experience Universal Studios Halloween Horror Nights at Universal Studios Hollywood, 2 complimentary frontline tickets to the event, and an exclusive behind-the-scenes maze tour with yours truly. Somebody's going to win this, okay? And this is the way it's going to work. I'm going to ask you a trivia question. It's going to be related to American Horror Story. It's not as hard as the last one I did, okay? This one's actually not that hard. I'm kind of blinded by those lights, but I'm going to look for a hand, and when I see a hand, I'm going to call on somebody. Don't yell out the answer. I will tear that to shreds, and then nobody gets it, okay? Everybody down with that? Yes. Okay. You ready?
Yes.
Yes.
Next slide. What is this character's name from American Horror Story Roanoke? Short little guy, white hair, right there in front. Cricket. You're right. Here we go. Congratulations. So you win. You're going to get frontline tickets to Horror Nights. There's information on there for who to contact about setting up the tickets, and also I will take you on an exclusive behind-the-scenes maze tour. Does that sound fun? Congratulations. All right. Thank you guys. From the bottom of my heart, and I know Chris would say the same thing if he was here. We are so lucky to have such passionate, obsessed, sometimes crazy, in a good way, fans of this event. You know, when we started this event back in 2006, there was no guarantees it was going to be around longer than 2006. I think we had a maze and a half that year, you know, and it was 7 nights, you know. Now this year, there's 8 mazes, you know, and it's 29 nights long. It goes into November. It goes past Halloween. We did that a couple of years ago. We actually, this is actually us, it's Universal that did this. We actually decided, Halloween doesn't end on the 31st. It ends when we say it ends. And it actually worked. People actually, eventually we're just going to take out Christmas altogether. But the only reason that's possible is because of the support of our fans. And, as a kid who grew up doing this in his parents' garage when he was 10 years old, thank you. You guys are the reason we do this. You guys, it's your passion. And I know a lot of you guys aspire to do this, and you're sitting out there in the audience, and you're like, how can I do this? How can I do this? There's a great line in Rocky Horror, right? Don't dream it, be it. I hope you guys enjoyed it today. I'm going to go to the step and repeat to do some interviews, but I'm happy to say hi to anybody who wants to come over. I'll be outside there. Thank you guys for coming today, and thank you for supporting Halloween Horror Nights.
Ladies and gentlemen, John Murdy. John, so nice to finally meet you in person. At the beginning of this panel, I promised these people that they might get wet.
Yes,
We wouldn't want to disappoint them now, would we, John?
Are you kidding me? Can't use real blood in here. I'm not gonna kill John Murdy. He's too
Iconic and precious!
You can't kill me, I'm already dead.
Turn this thing off.
Ladies and gentlemen, John
Thank you,
Murdy!
sir. Thank you guys.